Hey YouTube. This is part three. Yeah, three. I don't know why it's so hard for people to think that martial law can never be declared in the United States. In the Tulsa, Oklahoma race riots, which what it really was, they declared martial law. Black people were being detained, put into internment camps. All of this has happened before, and I'm thinking, was it a stage put forth for some kind of bigger event to come? I don't know. Some of this stuff is just disgusting to me. Just disgusting. These same people are walking around today, the ancestors, knowing of these stories. I'm pretty sure we're the only people that don't keep oral history. Because we stop talking at some point, whether it be to continue hiding identity or just because when something was said, our ideas were stolen. Like, there are so many reasons why. But nonetheless, we stopped talking at some point. And here are the survivors. And maybe they were put in internment camps because over and over again, what they're saying is they don't know one point or another. They heard, they can't deal directly, assuming because it's a documentary and it's being played probably all over the world. But look at these people. These people look like they could be my grandparents on either side. These are the indigenous people that were drove out of our indigenous habitats up into Oklahoma, again to fall victim to the same type of hatred, annihilation, reconditioning. Because this is when the history was being changed and our children were being born and they were getting this public education, so to speak. Again, these people, they survived. Probably waiting for someone to rise up eventually again to rebuild somewhere. But again, maybe defeated. After they rebuilt after 91 years, maybe they just felt like it wasn't worth it. The pain and suffering that came from rebuilding. When you look at the faces and compare them to the tribe's faces and descriptive hair qualities and all that. Of course, Miss Arnold has on a hairpiece, but just looking at them, you can tell that these are our ancestors, which gives my heart delight. But just the thought of afterwards, after you went from home to home, torching homes with kids hiding under the bed, families under the bed. Then somebody got on a plane and decided to drop, whether it be a bomb or glycerin or gasoline, whatever it be, gas on the burning homes and spread it. Then they were forced into internment camps and forced to leave in bus loads, train loads, however they left. This is the pain that is related to this history. And it's overwhelming. That's why I don't dig into too deep some of this stuff. It's crazy. So, is it safe to say or to assume that every so many years the indigenous are subject to ethnic cleansing? Every so many years here in America. And we're going to look into that next because I want to know. It matters to me. It doesn't seem to matter to anybody else, but it matters to me. So this is part 3, and I'll be back with you. I have to leave and run some errands, but I'm going to continue until I finish this documentary.
My grandfather told us all to get up, and we got up and we could see smoke and hear shots, and we couldn't sleep or anything. We were just frightened nearly to death. The next 2-3 days it was June, and school was going to be out. I was sitting up studying my lesson for an exam for the next day, and someone banged on that door, put that light out, but as soon as daylight came, we looked outside. All of these people were coming down this railroad track. Didn't nobody try to take a thing.
Sorry.
And those people were coming along one track, they just had clothes on, that's all. Didn't try to take anything.
Once authorities in Tulsa realized that the city was really out of hand, a decision was made to go ahead and request the National Guard. So a telegram was sent to Governor Robertson, who authorized the Adjutant General to send the National Guard into the city.
9:15 a.m.
We're going to pause and we're going to look at the fact that the National Guard was sent in. Just like they designated citizens to be deputized, and they were rounding up all the blacks. The National Guard, these are organizations that were started and created by invaders. So when they came in, they might have stopped the violence, so to speak, and that's the outright violence, but we don't know what happened behind closed doors to those that were sent to separate places. We just don't know. Okay, that's all I had to say.
17 hours after the mob began to gather outside the courthouse, Oklahoma City units of the National Guard arrive in Tulsa. Martial law is declared at 11:29. The National Guard takes control of the city and puts an end to the violence, burning, and looting. The troops also round up the remaining African Americans and take them to internment centers. The white rioters are disarmed, but for the most part are simply sent home. Greenwood lay in ruin. Confusion lingers in the wake of the riot. Estimates on the death toll are uncertain, and uncounted numbers of blacks leave Tulsa, never to return.
The number of dead in the riot has historically been a subject of some controversy. The best evidence suggests that upwards of 300 people died in the riot.
I talked to the sexton at Oaklawn Cemetery, and he said the truckloads had been brought in and they were buried in the Pauper's Field in the southwest corner of Oaklawn.
Another disputed fact is whether airplanes were used to drop bombs on Greenwood during the riot.
I remember that they said an airplane was dropping kerosene on the houses from an airplane. I don't ever remember the airplane. I've had so many people say that I don't see how you couldn't remember years ago. But at 5 years old, I just didn't pay any attention to it.
The evidence is strong that airplanes were used in the riot. Some say that bombs were dropped. Others say that nitroglycerin was dropped to propel the fires that were going.
What is certain in the aftermath of the riot is that Greenwood has been permanently altered.
At that point, you had a city that was changed forever. Nearly 50 square blocks had been burned to the ground. Nearly a tenth of the population was held under armed guard at internment centers.
In less than 24 hours, a marauding white mob has transformed a black promised land into a smoldering wasteland. An estimated 300 dead, more than 6,000 blacks in internment centers, over 1,000 black homes and businesses decimated.
When we rode through Greenwood, I said we will never, ever come back here. Though we would never, ever come back. There was not a building standing.
After more than 17 hours of anarchy, the race riot is quelled and the flames of Tulsa are extinguished. But the scars would take much longer to heal.
The riot didn't really end when the martial law was declared and when the state troops came. There were reverberations that went on for many, many months, and in fact years after that.
The physical damage left in the wake of the rampaging white mob is immense, estimated at $5 million.
That $5 million that success was lost in today's dollar, it would be in the billions.
The enormity of the devastation in Greenwood is staggering. This physical damage is matched by the impact of the riot on its residents. Despite not being accused of committing any crimes, most of the African Americans in Tulsa are locked up in internment centers, some held for days.
Ultimately, the economy of Tulsa began to come to a grinding halt because all these black men who were doing these so-called menial jobs were absent. And these jobs were necessary for the economy to move forward.
Faced with economic loss, white employers arranged for the release of the African Americans from the detention centers. But to gain their freedom, African Americans must wear specially issued tags signed by their employers.
Most folks, once they were released from the internment centers, came back, got busy, and got to work again rebuilding their community.
But rebuilding would not be easy in the face of the awesome destruction.
After the riot, because there was so much devastation in the Greenwood community, including a lot of homes, a lot of the victims of the riot literally lived in tent cities.
The Red Cross helps, spending at least $100,000 in its humanitarian relief efforts.
There is no doubt but the American Red Cross is the true angel of mercy during the Tulsa race riot and in the months that followed. The Red Cross provided food. The Red Cross provided tents and building materials to make platforms for tents. They found ways to provide medicine. They created a hospital in North Tulsa.
At the same time, the residents of Greenwood begin the long process of rebuilding. White Tulsa begins what will be an even longer process of coming to terms with its responsibilities for the riot. The white political and business leaders of Tulsa are embarrassed by the reality of what happened. The city establishes a reconstruction committee, which issues pronouncements of shame and makes pledges to rebuild Greenwood.
In point of fact, they did absolutely the opposite. And the most important event that they did, the most important action that the Reconstruction Commission did, was to try and steal the land where the black community had been, to use that as an industrial park or as the site of a new railroad station.
To accomplish this goal, a new fire ordinance is enacted mandating all construction meet tough new requirements. The additional costs of these requirements would make rebuilding Greenwood nearly impossible for its residents. Fortunately for them, a lawyer by the name of Buck C. Franklin is among those displaced by the riot.
B.C. Franklin, who's the father of noted historian Dr. John Hope Franklin of Duke University, was a lawyer here in Tulsa whose offices were destroyed in the riot. B.C. Franklin and his partners literally pitched a tent and set up their practice out of that tent.
Franklin had only moved to Tulsa a few months before the riot. But from his makeshift law office in a tent, Franklin and his partners mount a challenge to the validity of the fire ordinance. The Oklahoma Supreme Court strikes down the new ordinance, opening the way for the residents of Greenwood to rebuild. A week after the riot, a state grand jury is impaneled to investigate and charge those responsible for the atrocities.
The upshot of that is that the grand jury issued a sharply worded report that essentially said black people brought this on themselves. That was the bottom line. Given the era, the historical era, that is not a shocking or surprising result.